The room was white. That was the first thing she noticed. The walls were white, the floor was white, the ceiling was white. Even the table and chair, situated in the center and the only furniture to be seen, were white. This was the waiting room, the place that you were brought to before moving on. It was a little drab, she thought. No color, nothing to do to entertain oneself while they waited. Just this plain white room with a single chair and table. The room wasn't that big, only about 10 feet wide and about 20 long. She had entered at one end through a neat but simple white door. At the far end there was a curtain blocking one's view of the last few feet of the room. The curtain was also white and was made of a fine fabric with an odd pattern woven into it. When she first looked at it, she thought it looked rather thin, and yet no light seemed to pass through it, and she could see nothing of what was beyond. Her guide led her to the chair, and she sat down. "You ready?" he asked. "I think so." She paused a moment. "How long will it be before I can move on?" "Not long," he told her. "It rarely takes more than an hour, and usually a lot less. You just have to be patient." "And when it is time," she spoke again, "what exactly do I do?" He smiled. "Simple. Just walk through the curtain, and you'll be in the next stage." "Just walk through?" He nodded, and both were silent for a time. A moment later, he looked back to the door they had entered from. "Excuse me. It seems I am needed to guide another as well. I will return in a moment." With that, he hastened back out the door. She just sat there for a moment, unsure of what to do or what was going to happen. She wasn't sure how long she had sat there, though it could have been no more than a few minutes, when all of a sudden she heard a voice. She turned to the door, thinking her guide had returned, but she saw no one. Again she heard the voice, very faint, as though heard through water. A woman's voice, though she couldn't tell what they were saying. After a few seconds, the voice faded away, and all was silent again. Somewhat startled at this unexpected sound, she stood and moved around the room. She knew instinctively that there was nothing there, just the plain white walls. Still, she felt the need to look around and inspect the corners, searching for the owner of the voice she had heard. She did not go near the curtain, however. She had been told before entering not to go there before it was time. So she moved around the rest of the room, trailing her eyes along the edges of the floor where it met the walls. She lingered near the corners near the door and stopped to examine the door itself for a moment. As she expected, there was nothing there. Just the white walls, white floor, and white door. A moment later she heard the voice again, though just a little louder this time. She still could not understand what the woman said, but this time there were other voices that responded to the first. It was as though she could hear a conversation, though she could not tell from whence it came. She strained her ears, and for a moment she thought the sound came from the curtain. But it soon died away again, and she was no longer sure that she had been correct in this. "Not yet!" The guide's voice broke into her thoughts as she turned to see him standing in the doorway. She blinked and looked back, realizing that she was standing only inches from the curtain, though she could not remember crossing the room. She heard the guide chuckle behind her. "You are an impatient one," he said, "but you must wait for the appointed time." She shook her head. "No, it is not impatience. I heard voices." "Already?" The guide seemed a little surprised. "I guess it won't be long then." "What do you mean?" she asked, walking back to the table where he joined her. "Who did I hear?" "It does no good to ask questions now," he shook his head. "Once you move on, you won't remember what I told you anyway." She nodded. "Yes, I had forgotten about that." She turned back to the far end of the room. "Still, I wish I could understand what they were saying." With this, she crossed the room again and stood in front of the curtain. As she got closer, the voices began again. This time, they were much louder, but still, blurred was the only way she could describe it. They still sounded as though they were coming through water. She just stood there, trying to hear them, to understand them. Then, something happened. She still could not understand the words they said, but she began to relax. She could recognize one voice among all the others. While a number of other voices were there, the first voice she had heard was unmistakable. And she realized that hearing it and picking it out of the jumble of other sounds gave her comfort. For some reason, she felt connected to this voice. "You feel it?" the guide asked. She was somewhat startled to see him standing next to her, both within arm's reach of the curtain. "Who is that?" she asked again. But again he declined to answer, and a moment later excused himself to check on his other ward. She moved back to the chair, and for the next several minutes she simply sat there, completely still, anxious for the wait to be over so she could move on. The voices came and went, and each time she sought out the one voice that brought her comfort and stilled her anxiety. Then, without realizing it, she began to distinguish a second voice in the crowd. It was such a gradual realization that it was rather a shock when it came. This was a man's voice, deep and soothing to the ears. Sometimes she heard it singing, though she still could not understand the blurred words. Still, she began to seek out this voice among all the others. She was somewhat surprised to find that the two voices, the woman and now the man, frequently were heard together, when no other voices spoke. However, this male voice did not come as often as the female, but when it did come, they combined together and all her anxieties melted away. However, the curtain at the far end of the room still attracted her gaze, and soon she found herself drawn to it again. This time it was not unconsciously done, but with purpose she stood and crossed to the curtain. This time, feeling somewhat more daring, she reached out and brushed her hand across the fabric. She didn't draw it back, she only wanted to feel it, but touching it caused a startling result. Almost immediately she heard the woman's voice, very excited, and what she might have called joyful. It was soon joined by the man's voice, which, though subdued at first, soon rose to match the woman in excitement. She stepped back almost afraid of what she had done, yet she could sense that the voices were pleased with her actions. She was about to repeat this experiment when she heard her guide call out once more, "I thought you weren't impatient." She turned to him. "I'm not, just curious." He chuckled again. "You didn't draw the curtain back, did you?" She shook her head no, and he smiled. "Good. Then I guess there's nothing wrong. Most are curious, it's only natural." He walked to stand beside her again. "I came to tell you to get ready, not long now." They both stood there, waiting. She didn't really know what they waited for, but she trusted that the guide did. After a few moments, she again reached out to touch the curtain, but gave him a hesitating glance. He nodded approval, and so she drew her hand across the fabric again. This time the woman's voice again came through in excitement, but it was joined by many others, but not the man's voice. She kept her hand playing across the fabric, and voices grew ever more excited. Beside her, the guide began laughing. Then there was a sudden chime. A clear, crisp sound of a perfectly formed crystal bell pealed through the room. At this sound, the guide turned toward her. "It's time. Are you ready?" She smiled. "Yes." "Then step through." With a smile on her face, she silently thanked her guide. Then she reached out, drew the curtain back, and stepped through. The room was filled with the noise of a baby crying. The doctor worked quickly to clip the cord and hand the newborn to a nurse to be cleaned. He looked over at the mother, still sweating from the ordeal as she lay in the bed. "It's a girl," he told her, smiling. "Well, she's fine and healthy. 10 fingers, 10 toes, everything that should be there, and, well, nothing that shouldn't." The mother smiled back. Though exhausted, she was anxious to hold her little girl. The nurse washed her quickly and then wrapped her in a swaddling cloth. Bringing the infant to her mother, the nurse placed the little babe in the outstretched arms. "Look at her," the mother said. "Isn't she beautiful?" At the sound of the mother's voice, the little girl's wails calmed to a gentle fussing and soon died away. She lay there perfectly content in her mother's arms. She opened her eyes and looked up at the face above her. "Look," the mother called out. "She knows me." The nurse just smiled. The little eyes began moving around the room, looking at everything, as babies often do, taking in the new sights and smells of this strange world. But the mother, watching her daughter's eyes, thought she almost saw a purpose in them, as though the little babe was looking for something specific. A moment later, the door to the room opened and a young man came in. "Sorry I'm late," he said, somewhat out of breath. "Did I miss it?" At this, the mother gasped and looked at the father. "Did you see that?" she asked. He was by her side in a flash, looking down at his daughter. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No," the mother said. "She turned when you came in the room. I think she recognized your voice." The two young parents looked down at the little infant girl, and as they smiled down at her, they saw her look back at them, a look of perfect comfort beaming from her eyes.